Equality is a noble ideal. It is something we do not yet have in this country, unfortunately. Persons of color and the LGBT community are treated differently and disparagingly relative to their more established peers. It is normal to want to establish equality. These egalitarian ideals are very noble. To have everyone be on an equal playing field, this is good and this is just. However, some organizations go about this the wrong way, and they harm their own demographics that they intend to represent and hinder their very same cause. Today, I'm Justin Vega, and I'm here to talk to you about Black Lives Matter and why it will unfortunately fail at helping its cause. So to begin, Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 as a response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's killer. It was founded predominantly by three individuals: Patrice Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Timeti. They combined their skills of media manipulation, public advocacy, and web design to create the website blacklivesmatter.com. However, none of them have taken any initiative to actually lead this organization. They have instead designed it to be a leader-full organization, to have many different leaders. And while most of them are possessed with incredible rhetoric and remarkable speaking ability, there is no single figurehead at the head of this organization. There is no one to be held accountable for anything that goes wrong and any messages and misrepresentations. There is no one to guide this organization in one single path. It is instead a conglomerate of many different chapters scattered throughout the United States that act almost independently in their own name. Secondly, the language used by many of its advocates, not all, but enough to be very notable, is often hateful and divisive. They have also, much like they have made a decisive decision, a very deliberate choice to not have a single figurehead and distribute the leadership position throughout the entire community, they have also chosen to not assimilate their language. Now this has a very good point. It shows the power that they do not need to submit to anything. However, it also does not allow them to communicate more effectively with the groups that have the most power that they need to effectively appease, being the WASPs, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that rule our Congress. By not speaking their language, they're less likely to convince them to champion their cause. And that's why you have certain Democrats like Hillary Clinton trying in vain to relate to the cause without actually doing much for it. And additionally, the hatred towards the police force and general violence often causes peaceful protests to degenerate into violent riots. There's this one video of a certain protest that was sparked by rage and turned into a violent riot with protesters slinging rocks at officers. There's a certain moment when a single officer goes down and the crowd begins chanting, "Little Piggly Wiggly down, huzzah," as if felling an officer is something to be proud of, as if assaulting a man of peace was something good. Now, of course, there are many bad cops. This is irrefutable. But to have blanket violence is inexcusable. And now on to the third point. Black Lives Matter, because it has no figurehead, and because the language can be so misconstrued to be violent, it is often misrepresented in the grossest and most inhumane of ways possible. It is used to justify murder. In Baton Rouge, a former Marine sergeant, used the cause of Black Lives Matter as he ambushed and shot down 3 officers and wounded several more. This gross misrepresentation will be picked up by the media and used to slander the movement and the organization at large. This will make it even more difficult for them to have any sympathy and garner any support. So, in conclusion, Black Lives Matter, as the organization, not the movement in a whole, because that is a distinctive entity, but as an organization, will fail to go about its goals because it has no leader and no focus. Its language is too hateful, too divisive, and too particular to its own self and not to the public authority, which it must, unfortunately, as all movements must, appease and convince. And thirdly, its constant gross misrepresentation will continue to hinder it as it moves forward. Thank you.
Do you,
yeah.
Oh, right.
You didn't have anything to give me, or did
I
you?
can give you this one.
Okay. All right, the proposition is identified at the beginning of the speech, although you phrase it in a way that makes it sound like a question, so you want to be careful about backing into your argument instead of making an affirmative argument. There's no preview of what the supporting structure is going to be at the beginning of the speech, so we know exactly where you're headed. That's a problem. You do signpost the claims, though, as you get to them on the individual points, and I think you do a very good job of that, so it's relatively easy to follow, but the signposting at the beginning with the preview is something that I think is expected. It's going to make your argument easier for people to remember and to focus on. The information that you have is generally you got factual data on the founding of the organization. That's okay. You should give us a source site on it, but we don't get much more than that. The inference that the leaderful or leaderless structure is deliberately planned, that's okay. I understand the concept behind that. Here's where we need some more information. What is the consequence of that? You make generalizations about how this is going to be problematic when it comes to taking responsibility or developing an effective plan of action, that's not going to happen, and that's about as much as you say about it. We don't have any demonstration that leaderless groups are consistently unsuccessful at achieving their goals and objectives. You don't have any comparable examples to illustrate this point. We don't have any people who are movement authorities who research this kind of social activity expressing their opinion about this. This is an inference that you're making, and you don't really have any evidence to back it up. It's just a conclusion that you've arrived at, and I think I can see why you would arrive at that conclusion. I'm just not sure I'm convinced that you are correct. The notion that the movement or the organization sometimes gets tainted with hate and violence, you have an explanation about that. And again, I understand that. You kind of cite the example of riots. That's the closest you get to a specific example. And you mentioned the quoted people at the activity, and that might in fact taint the way people view the organization or the movement. And at the end, you distinguish the organization from the movement, and I'm not sure that anybody who's watching or listening to events that are going on in public in relationship to this subject are going to know that distinguishing characteristic. So that might be something that you probably need to spend a little bit more time on. And then you've got the final example of the police officers who are basically ambushed by somebody who is clearly crazy, and is using Black Lives Matter as a cover for their extreme points of view or their hatefulness. And I appreciate the fact that this is probably not representative of what's going on, and the fact that they have this loose structure makes it easier for people to conflate the two things together. That, I think, is a little bit closer to the kind of information that you need to have in the rest of the presentation also. I did think at the end of the speech, contrary to what you had at the beginning, you had a good summary of what the argument was, reminding us of what the structure was supposed to be, and that kind of helps rescue it a little bit. It's reasonably well presented. It's the data, I think, is a little bit thin for the inference that you're making. All right, thank you.
Thank you.